I think we are ready to get started. For this class, we're going to learn how to create schedule exceptions. Schedule exceptions is just what we refer to as any time off or overtime that gets posted onto the schedule. For this class, we're going to focus on creating the time off and overtime reasons. How and when those get applied will be addressed during actual training classes. But for now, we're just going to create lists of time off reasons like vacation, sick, and personal time, as well as overtime reasons such as court, staffing shortage, and any others you may need.
Okay.
After we're done creating the day off and overtime reason codes, we're also going to set up email destination defaults. What this does is, as your employees request either a day off or overtime or payment for overtime worked, we want to make sure that emails are sent to those employees' supervisors so that the supervisors know they have to log on to the application, review the entry, and either approve it or deny it. So we will do that at the very end of this class.
Okay.
So let's get started. I'm going to log on to my database here. And we're going to talk about time off codes first. Now, very briefly, those codes will be displayed in the list for any requesting employee. So if I was Robert Novak here, actually I'll select a future day. There we go. If Darren here was looking to take this day off, Darren can click on his name, select Request Time Off from the sidebar. Darren would then fill out the form, including the date or date range that he would like to take off. And he will also select the reason for the time off. Once the day off reason is selected, the balance for that time will be displayed. So it is this list of day off codes that we're going to learn how to build. I will just continue with my form, submitting it as a request. And at the very bottom, before I click on the Save button, email notification is set to default. What this means is, based on Darren Coleman's group assignment or squad assignment, we are going to send an email notifying his supervisor, and you can't see it very well behind the pop-up window, but that's Sergeant Foster here. We want to make sure that an email is sent to Sergeant Foster so that he can log on, review the entry, and hopefully approve it.
Okay.
Let's click on the Save button. We'll see that the day off request is now posted onto the single shift view, but if I click on Return to Daily Schedule, it is displayed in blue with a code VAC and a question mark indicating that it has yet to be approved.
Kind of like the other system.
I'm sorry?
Kind of like the other system. That's perfect.
Absolutely. At this point, really nothing has changed, really. Maybe the name of the screens that you're going into to perform the function have changed, but the function itself has pretty much remained the same. So once a supervisor has reviewed and hopefully approved that item, it will be displayed in green and the question mark will be removed. Let's take a look at the setup menu. And under the setup menu, we are looking for the days off category, specifically the Setup Day Off Codes screen. I'm going to highlight the vacation day, the one that I just used for my example. And using the form over to the right, we're just going to take a look at some of the fields that we need to make sure that we fill out for any other day off codes we choose to create. So starting with the sections labeled in red, which are required fields, we need to have a code of 5 characters or less. VAC is what we saw posted on the schedule once the entry was saved. The description is just the full description of the day off code as it would be displayed in the drop-down menu that the employee is selecting. Under units, your options are hours, days, or weeks. If this day off code can be used in hourly increments, then this is what we choose.
All our time is in hours.
Okay. Under abbreviation, choose a 1-character abbreviation for that day off code. That's going to be used only in select schedule views where we're just summarizing the time off activity on a like a monthly type schedule view where we may not have a lot of space to display full details. Next, under Track as Day Off, you're going to leave that checkbox marked if there is a bank of time you're going to be drawing from. There might be some types of day off codes that you will not track as day off, such as bereavement, or if there's like administrative leave, or something that you might be using if someone is suspended with or without pay. There isn't necessarily a bank of time that you're going to draw when using those day off reasons. They are just being posted onto the schedule as time off.
Can I ask you a question here?
Sure.
Like sick time for us is not a bank of time, but it does get calculated naturally on how many sick hours you had. But we have unlimited sick time, so we don't have a bank of sick time. Would I check that there or not?
You don't have. I would leave it unchecked because track as day off does not mean you cannot report on the activity, okay. Right? Even though you're not going to upload a set of hours to everyone's sick bank, you still would like to be able to go in and run a report to see how many times did someone call out sick. You're still going to be able to do that, whether you click on that checkbox or not.
Okay. Now, if I have one employee here, because we have a booking or a clerk who actually does get sick time, so in this schedule, I'd probably have to click it because she actually has a bank, but the officers do not.
You're absolutely right. So just because you have one employee that does have sick time, for which you will upload that time one way or another, you will have to check that box. The good news is that it should not affect anyone else's usage of the system.
Okay.
Okay. Under Bank to Apply, we're going to link that day off reason to the bank that it needs to draw from. This allows you the flexibility of selecting other day off banks. In other words, and again, you just mentioned you don't actually have a sick bank per se for officers, but you do for a civilian staff member. If you are creating a code for FMLA, and you wanted to have an FMLA sick so that you can not only have a separate day off code that you can track, but you want to draw from an existing bank. Here, look at mine. I have a vacation day off code, but I also have an FMLA vacation day off code that draws from the same bank. So what this allows me to do is if I need to post FMLA activity onto the schedule like that, it allows me to do so while drawing from the same bank used by vacation. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out, that depending on how you structure your time off codes, how they're tracked and how they're used, you can select a different bank to apply if necessary. That's it for the items in red. Over to the right, you're going to have a series of checkboxes. The only two we're going to be concerned with at this time are allowed to select from web. This means you are making the day off code available for use on this web portal that your employees are logging on to. If you do not check that box, your employees will not be able to select this as an available reason.
Okay.
There's a checkbox labeled Overtime Allowed. This refers to your overtime hiring procedures, specifically when you have a staffing shortage and you are looking to generate a call list or to offer that overtime opportunity to your staff. What this checkbox does is it takes into consideration people who have scheduled time off. And in other words, I may have requested a vacation day for tomorrow's night shift, and it was approved by a supervisor. Well, that shift might now have too many call-outs for sick time and may fall below what your minimum staffing requirements are. The question becomes, can someone like me be offered the opportunity to work on that shift? Some departments might say, no, you had time off scheduled on that day, so we would not offer it to you. Others might say, yes, as long as it wasn't sick time that you were posted on the schedule to have, then we might still call you and offer you the opportunity to work. If by taking vacation time, I am still possibly allowed to work overtime on the shift that I took time off on, you would mark overtime allowed.
So when I do the sick time, I wouldn't have that check.
Right. Generally speaking, we would not allow you to fill in that shift because you would probably be filling in, the shift that you vacated or the spot that you vacated. Whereas if I took vacation or comp time on that day, I wasn't the one that caused the shortage. My time off may have been approved weeks or months ago, so you may allow me, and I may not be the first choice. You may hire off of an RDO list, right, before you offer it to anyone that took time off on that shift, whether it was vacation or comp. So this does not factor in any of those rules yet. It's just saying there is the possibility that I could work that shift again, even though I called out on a vacation day.
Okay.
Now, at the bottom of this screen, you have your approval status colors. With my vacation day, we saw the entry was originally saved in blue. Once it was approved, it would be displayed in green. Approved with stipulation is an approval level typically used as a step in the process. So an officer might request a day off. A supervisor may approve with stipulation, and someone above that supervisor, whether it's a lieutenant, a captain, or maybe even the chief, may be providing the final approval. So if that sounds like something you might be using, if the sergeant is not giving the full approval, then you're going to have to assign it a color for the supervisory level approval, and then the final approval color, which I'm using green. So that's pretty much how a day off code should look like. We're going to add a brand new one. I already have comp time in there, but I'm running out of good day off reasons, so I'm going to re-enter it using a slightly different code. CMP for comp. Under units, I'm going to set that to hours. For the abbreviation, C, and remembering that that is limited to 1 character. I will mark track as day off because I will be accruing comp time as I work overtime. I'm going to leave bank to apply alone for the moment because the new code that I created is not yet available here on this list until I save the code. So we're going to continue filling out this form, we're going to save it, and then we're going to go back into this screen and link it to the proper bank. Over to the right, I will mark this as overtime allowed. And that again is only if I am allowed to work overtime on the shift for which I took comp time off of. I'm going to allow to select from web to make it as an available option so that when someone wants to use it, they actually see it on a list. At the very bottom of the screen, I'm going to select my approval colors. And I can change the toggle the font color to get better contrast on some of these. Otherwise, I can click on the Save button. And here is the new day off code. I still need to link this to the bank, but I need to go back into that screen. So I'm going to click on Setup Day Off Codes again, so it reloads the screen. I'm going to click on the new day off code I created, and now I'm going to see the bank displayed in the list. I'm going to resave this, and we're done. Now, my recommendation here is create all of the day off codes first, set up your colors, mark the appropriate checkboxes, and then re-enter the screen, and one by one make sure that each day off code is linked to the proper bank.
Gotcha. Okay.
And you'll want to save that, you know, in between each day off item. Any questions on creating day off codes?
I don't think so.
Okay. We'll move on to creating our overtime reason codes and pay options. Now, I always like to do the pay types first. So before we do that, though, let's just do a brief demonstration of how the overtime gets posted onto the schedule. And since you have some experience with the older version of this system, you know, not a whole lot's going to change. The screen looks a little different, but we're still capturing the same fields of information. Let's go back to today's schedule for a moment, and I'll use someone from the night shift, and the example will be based on this person working a couple of extra hours at the end of their shift. So they return after they're done working, and now they're going to submit a request for overtime payment. I'll use Josh here at the bottom of the list. So once I click over on the left, I am going to select Schedule Overtime. Now, because I'm logged on as an administrator, I'm seeing every name on the list. But if Josh was to do this, he can only request on his own behalf. So he would be limited to which names appear on this list. We're going to fill out the form, the date that we worked overtime, the shift that we were on when the overtime occurred, the reason for the overtime, which may have been we were held over for some reason. And under pay type, we're going to select our preference. Do we want cash or do we want comp time? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to create the overtime reasons and the pay options. If Josh is entering this on his own behalf, he can only submit this as a request. At the very bottom, we're going to send a notification by default to Josh's supervisor. Okay. And that will get, let's put in some times in there. That will get forwarded to a supervisor for approval. And you'll see the late call overtime is displayed in a bluish color with a question mark at the end of it. So now what we have to do is create the pay options and create the overtime reason codes. So as I mentioned before, I like creating the pay types first. So let's do that. Let's click on the Setup menu. And under the Overtime section, we are going to select Setup Overtime Codes. Over on the left, you see the list of my existing overtime reasons. I'm going to click on the one that we just used. Over on the right, you'll notice that the form doesn't have nearly as many fields required for it as the day off codes did. But we do have to give it a code of 5 characters or less, a description. Units we're going to set to hours. It's not a required field, but we want to make sure that is set properly. Although mandatory hours callback is not a required field, it is used quite often for situations where there is a minimum payout. Court is a great example of that. I might be in court for a half hour, but I may be paid for 3 hours. So we'll take a look at an example of where you might need that. At the very bottom of the screen, you have the color in which the overtime reason code will be displayed, and we saw an example of that on the daily schedule. Over to the right, you're going to see the available pay options. This is why I like to create the pay options first, because when I create my overtime reason codes, I can lock certain pay types to it. I might have a grant-related overtime reason code where I only want cash options to be available. Okay. That's why I like to create the pay types first. Okay. Under overtime, let's create set of pay types. And I'm missing my time and a half cash and comp pay types. So let's create them. Let's click on Add New.
Can I stop you for a second? So
Sure.
fill in all my codes, and then I go to this screen?
There's no rule for which one you have to do first. I like to do the pay types first. I just wanted to show you what the late call overtime code looked like because we used it in an example. But I like to put my pay types in first so that when I go to create my overtime reason codes, as I'm creating them, I can then reference which available pay options I want to make. You see, if you do this first, this is going to appear blank because you haven't created the pay types yet. So I'm not saying you have to do it that way. It's just I like to do my pay types first.
Makes more sense.
Yeah.
All right, so let me say I go to setup, and because I missed where you went. You went from setup to what?
Overtime. And then set up pay types.
Okay.
We're going to click on Add New, and I'm going to create two examples here. I'm going to create a time and a half cash and a time and a half comp payment option. For the code, I'm going to use 1.5C for cash. And again, you only have 5 characters to work with here. So another possibility is to do something like this. Now, the description is what everyone is going to see when they're picking their preferred pay type. So here, under the description, I'll type in 1.5 cash. Under the payment method, I'll set that to cash and set the pay factor to 1.5. Now that we have our code, description, our payment method, and our factor, we can click on the Save button. Next, I'll create my comp payment type. Let's click on Add New once again. And using the same sort of naming convention here for the codes, I'll call that 15CMP, and under the description, 1.5 comp. So for this one, we're going to switch the payment method over to time. The factor is still 1.5, but now we have the option to apply a bank to that payment option. And so what's happening here is if I was working an extra 2 hours at the end of my shift and I submit a request for overtime payment and I choose comp time as my payment method, once my supervisor approves my overtime entry, those hours will be placed into my bank for me to use using the proper pay factor. So you work 2 hours, you're going to get 3 hours of comp time. Let's click on the Save button. And here, you may need additional pay options. If there's anything that you are going to schedule using overtime, but that could get paid out in straight payments, then make sure that you have a 1.0 cash option and a 1.0 comp time option. Okay. I have a training time payment option where if I have an officer who is training on their regular day off, we might give them training time hour for hour. We may not consider it comp time because maybe they have to use training time a little differently. Training time may not carry over from year to year. So I created a training time day off code that our officers can use to burn that time that they've accrued. And I've created a training time payment option. So again, if I'm on a regular day off and I have to attend 8 hours of a training class, I'm going to submit 8 hours of overtime. And once my supervisor approves that, 8 hours of usable training time will be placed into my bank. So those are just some additional options you might choose to use or you might need to use for your pay types.
Can I ask you something? We have case involvement is what we use. So if a guy hung over, do I put that code here, like case involvement?
No, case involvement is an overtime reason. Pay types are the payment methods. So if I'm an investigator, detective, and I'm involved in a case or something, I'm working a couple of extra hours, there should be an overtime reason I choose from, and then there is an available pay option for that overtime reason. And we're going to create that. We're going to create overtime reasons in the next screen.
Oh, okay.
In fact, we'll take a look at that next. Let's click on Setup. And under Overtime, we're going to select Set Up Overtime Codes. And, in my list, I have a lot of standard items like court, late call, or held over, related overtime, manpower shortage. The more overtime reasons you have, the more detailed your reporting is going to get, because you're going to be able to run reports that tell you how many hours of overtime was worked for each reason, and also how much money you may have spent for a particular overtime reason. Okay. And so if I click on the Add New button, I can enter a code of 5 characters or less, a description, just put something generic in here. The units will be set to hours. At the very bottom, you're going to select a color for how that overtime gets posted onto the schedule. I like to use a color that is different from the day off reason colors, so that when this overtime gets posted onto the schedule, it's not mistaken as a time off entry. So I'll choose orange for this one. And now over to the right, I'm going to choose the available pay options. So you might have many different pay options used for various things, but for this particular overtime reason, you may only want them to choose either time and a half cash or time and a half comp.
We probably only have 2 pay codes. It would be those 2.
It would be those 2. So if that's the case, you can leave this blank. If you leave this blank, that means all pay options are now made available.
Gotcha.
Okay. Let's click on the Save button. And we're done. There it is at the very top. Now I mentioned court. We often see a minimum payout for that. Maybe I have court overtime on what is my regular day off. Maybe I was there a half hour, but you may pay me a minimum of 2 or 3 hours. So that's where we're going to put in that minimum.
Yeah, we don't have that, so.
Okay. That's how we create our overtime reason codes. Next, we're going to look at how to set up the email notification rules. Before we do that, are there any questions on creating overtime codes or the pay types?
I don't think so. Once I get in the system, I think I'll understand better.
Okay. Okay, so the last topic for this session deals with setting up email destination defaults. To do this, we're going to click on the Setup menu up top, and under the Employee section, we are going to select Setup Groups. On the left side, I'm going to see my groups, which we used to refer to as squads in our legacy application. And now, because I am operating a police-based schedule here, I have squads A through D, and many other departments or groups typically found in most police departments. I'm going to use Squad A for my examples here. Squad A and B, to be precise. I'm going to select the group, and over on the right, I'm going to click on this button next to Email Destination. What you're seeing here in blue are the 4 approval statuses for time off and overtime requests. What you're seeing under each column is who is being notified when the day off or overtime entry switches to that approval status. So, if an employee or officer in Squad A requests time off or payment for overtime worked, everyone under the request column will receive a notification. That includes the requesting employee and the supervisor of that particular group. Okay. Because if I was the sergeant of Squad A, I'm interested in seeing requests, right? Because those are the ones that I am responsible for reviewing and eventually approving. Once the supervisor approves the time off or overtime entry, everyone under the approved column will receive a notification. And you'll notice here the employee is the only one on the list. So this is how we communicate back to the requesting employee that their time off or overtime entry has been approved, or maybe it was denied. Now, in your department, are the sergeants going to be giving full approval on all time off and overtime entries?
Well, let me ask you this: is what we have now is the sergeant gets it. He says yay or nay verbally to them, and they turn a sheet in to me, and then I used to go in the system and approve it.
Okay. You can continue doing that. Our system is designed to allow that process to take place within the application. So the way it would work out for you is the requesting employee and the direct supervisor, the one who's giving the verbal yay or nay, would be under the request column. Okay.
Okay.
Once the sergeant receives the email notification, they will log on to the application, review the entry, and based on the staffing situation for the day or anything else they need to take into consideration, they will approve with stipulation. So that's a conditional approval. Okay. And this is where your name would have to appear. Okay. Because you're not interested in the requests necessarily. The sergeants are taking care of that. You care about items that were approved with stipulation. That is going to be your cue to log on, review the entry, and give it its final approval, in which case everyone under the approved column will receive a notification. So it's up to you who you want to notify beyond just the requesting employee. If you are going to have the sergeants use the approved with stipulation, you may consider putting the sergeant under the approved column, because as the sergeant, I may have approved it with stipulation, but you may have denied it.
Right.
Right? Maybe you saw something the sergeant didn't see. So if you, at that point, the sergeant at his or her approval level, they're expecting the person to come in. Right? Approved with stipulation means, yeah, we're sort of approving it, but we're flagging it in a way where it could end up getting denied at a later time. So you may choose to send a notification to the sergeant under this level, letting them know, yes, this item was approved fully. Don't expect to see that person on that day. Now, is your intention to continue using the paper slips for the sergeant, or do you want them to start approving through the system?
We're kind of on the fence, and actually, police don't like to change, but anything is better than paper. The paper is a pain. Now, mind you, we keep an entire book of paper in case we had a server, so we always kept papers in case, God forbid, something was to happen, fire or whatever. We had a book that we could always go back and look, and something happened to the server, I don't know, it crashed or whatever. So we always had a backup paper side of it.
Okay.
So I don't think we necessarily need the paper side any longer.
No, I would agree with that, because first off, I think you guys are eventually going hosted, am I correct? It's not going to be on your servers any longer.
No, we're, what is it, iCloud, right?
Right, so we are actually in possession of your data. So anything that happens within your infrastructure does not affect the safety of your data in any way. There is, and not to say that this is really a problem in your department, but if you have situations where there's a popular day that people want to request time off on, Super Bowl Sunday, I'll just throw that out, and you have a bunch of people trying to request that day off, having them submit it directly through the system as a request allows the date stamp information to now be captured. So we know who put in their request first, right? And again, not to say that that's an issue in your department, but it is, it's a benefit to some.
Right.
Okay.
We have a 3-man shift, so the sergeant kind of runs the shift. When he says yes, they're good, and we go from there. We don't run into the particular problem of like, hey, 2 guys put off, and now we have to determine who gets it. That's kind of done prior to getting to me.
Yeah, and I tell you something, if Most of the time off that gets verbally approved by a sergeant ends up getting approved by you. If that's a 99.9% certainty that that's going to happen, you don't have to involve yourself in the approval process if you don't want to be involved. You can just have the sergeants review the entry because they can see the schedule. They can even see the time balance. If that's something that they are currently responsible for knowing, the information's there. But if you just wanted to have the officer request time off, have the sergeant approve it, and then you just oversee it, that works really well. I mean, we can put your name under the approved column. Maybe you just want to know when stuff gets approved.
I think that may happen later down the road once the system gets going, but as of right now, the chief would like it to be naturally the sergeant gets it, and then he sends it to me, and I give the final approval.
Got you. Okay. And that's how it's done now.
As we go also without using paper, so that may be a better option as we get going, but as of right now, we're going to try to keep it to how it is. The sergeant says yay, sends it to me, and I give final approval.
Perfect. And the beauty is that if and when you decide to do it differently, you go in and do it. It's not like you are, this is the only way that you can do it from this point moving forward. You can always have the system evolve along with you. Okay. So using Squad B, which does not have any current settings, under the request, really across all 4 levels, we want to make sure that the employee is always notified. I'm going to select the sergeant for Squad B, and we're done with the request column. And we're just going to repeat this process. Under Approve with Stipulation, it's going to be the employee and whoever else is going to be notified. Okay. But you're just going to move through each one. Again, the one constant is the employee should be under all of them.
I know we're running out of time, but can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
The request I got that goes to the sergeant, well, the employee and the sergeant. The approve would slip. Of course, the employee, now, the sergeant doesn't need to be there?
No, because he knows or she knows that it was approved with stipulation because they were the ones that applied that change. The approved with stipulation is where I would expect to see your name, right? Because you don't necessarily care about the request. If the sergeant gets the verbal request from an officer and they're like, hey, I want to take this day off, and the sergeant says, no, you can't, we're already, at our minimums, that's not even getting to you, right?
That's what we get.
Right. So you only cared about the things that the sergeant for that particular group looked at and said, okay, it looks good to me. I'm going to approve with stipulation, and now that is going to kick an email to the employee letting them know that, hey, I looked at it, so far so good. Now it's going to the next approval process or the next approval level, which is you. So your name would be under this list, and then you are going to give the final approval. The moment you change that entry over to approved, everyone under this column is going to receive an email notification. So of course the employee should be at the top of the list, but you may choose to put the supervisor in there as well, because we like to think that the supervisor is looking at the schedule and keeping on top of all of the changes, but if those changes are being applied by someone other than them, a nice courtesy email would be appreciated, so you might choose to put the sergeant under that column.
As well as myself, or no?
No, because you were the one that did the approval, so you
Okay.
know what you did, right? We're really using this to notify people who were not involved in that that approval process. So it would be the sergeant. Maybe you have someone. You mentioned you have like a civilian person in there who's either the chief secretary or just somebody who's kind of oversees
Maybe
everything on
even
the
the
house.
chief, I mean, at that point, because he
Yeah,
wants
there
to
you
be
go. Right.
Okay.
Right, like he doesn't care about who requested stuff. He might not even care about when the sergeant approved it, but he might care about, what has been finally approved by you. So
Yeah.
you're right, the chief could go under that column.
So the sergeant and chief, I would put under approve and deny, just in case, with the employee.
Yep.
Okay.
So we'll want to repeat these steps for as many different groups as you have over on the left. Now, one very important thing to keep in mind, all we're doing here is sending out email notifications. We are not setting up the rules for who can actually approve. I know that sounds confusing, but
Yeah, I understand.
right, any sergeant might need to be able to approve any time off or overtime entry for any officer, even if they're not in the same group, because sergeants are going to switch with one another, officers are going to switch with one another. So as a Squad B sergeant, I may have to approve a time off or overtime entry for a guy in another squad. So all we're trying to do here is send out general notifications, but knowing that if my sergeant isn't working today or my sergeant is out on vacation, I can always go to the sergeant on duty and ask them to review my requests.
Okay.
So that's it for creating our day off and overtime codes and then setting up the email destinations. Are there any questions on really anything that we covered in this morning's class?
I don't think so.
And I think you mentioned before, it's a matter of going in and beginning to do it for yourself. I would just like to remind you that there are training help outs. So as you are building each item, if you come across any issues, sign up for the help out. They're 30 minutes. They're actually 25 minutes, but we can usually push it to 30. And we will take a look at what you're building on your system and help you out with any questions that you have. And there's no limit to how many of those you can sign up for.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
All right. Well, if there are no questions, that's it for me.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.